Welcome to Wine Country at Work. I'm Ralph DeAmicis, your host. This is a very interesting interview. It's with Steve Reynolds, who runs the Reynolds family vineyards over on the Silverado Trail in Napa. The reason I interviewed him is because his approach to science is really innovative, and the things he's done over the years have been really something to remark about. You know, so many people who work in these fields, they're very risk adverse, and you have to be. It's food production. It's about not taking too many chances, because each year you get this many grapes and you have this much time to process them. And if you screw up, you got to wait a year before you get grapes again. But he, over the years, with a background in science, has done some really innovative stuff. And as we talked, I realized he had gone beyond wine into tequila, and it had become kind of a personal mission of his. So between the two different parts of the talk, because it's really two parts, I think we're gonna learn some interesting things about a winemaker's approach to beverages and to science and to nature and to producing a good product for people. So hope you find this one interesting. I really enjoyed doing the interview. This is Steve Reynolds from the Reynolds family vineyards. So welcome to Wine Country at Work. I'm Ralph DeAmicis, your host. And we're talking today with Steve Reynolds, the Reynolds family winery. And thank you, Steve, for taking the time to work with me today and share some information.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you, because I've known your winery for many times. I've been here more than 100 times over the years, touring. But I remember from a number of years ago, you make one of your wines using an ozone technique.
Exactly. We've done a number of different things. I'm kind of, I don't know, somebody told me in the Valley I'm considered sort of the mad scientist, right? So I think having a chemistry degree as an undergraduate degree, I guess led me down various weird winemaking paths, but all of them have taught me something along the way.
Well, you also have a background, your previous profession was as a dentist. So you were
Correct.
Used to dealing with living tissue.
Yeah, yes. It's funny, I joke around sometimes at wine dinners, and I always joke, and, just to get a little humor into a snobby wine dinner, right? I try to tell people that I took the most logical path to becoming a winemaker as a oceanography major, then commercial diver in Alaska, then chemistry degree, then dental school, then finally going back to Davis, right? So
just a straight line.
Doesn't everybody do that to become a winemaker in their life? I know.
Well, I think being a good winemaker it's important to have a diverse point of view, to have a broad way of approaching the world, because there's so many different elements that are included in winemaking. It's just
100%.
From the day you decide you're going to put a vineyard in to the finally when you pour in the wine for people. I think it's especially interesting too, because as a dentist, you were trained about the different parts of the palate and how people taste.
Exactly. Yeah. So that, there's so many things. I think, what creates a resume, right? There's so many layers of experience along the way. And you don't realize, I think, when you're younger and you go through these things and you think, oh my God, I just wasted 2 years. Oh my God, this, it's not getting me to where I need to be. Maybe it is, right?
It all contributes.
Yeah.
It all contributes. Now, I know that the technique of using ozone instead of using sulfites I think it was developed in Italy. Is that correct?
It was. So I think, I believe it was developed there. It might not have been, but certainly where it was more perfected for food products and some of the bigger companies that brought it to market. So that ozone process that I did many years ago, I think we were the first winery in the United States. I got to believe it was 12 years ago or so.
I remember.
It was a company called Pura Vino. So we did some of the first sulfite-free wines. And ozone's such a magical thing. And I'm a little surprised it didn't take off more in the United States. I know there was another company, I won't name the name. I think I know it. But, both companies would tell me about their process. Pura Vino, their dosing was much higher and a little more with the science to back it. So the whole thing about using ozone, which is the O3 molecule, it's very unstable and very lethal to any microorganism that requires oxygen. So it's used a lot actually in cleansing in restaurants, et cetera. They're actually using it in vineyards in various ways. But why it was relevant, is we all hear about sulfur and sulfites. I believe sulfa drugs were the first antibiotics used in World War I.
Yeah.
And so, it's our little helper that, gets rid of bad things, bugs, bacteria. I don't think people realize, just like cheese, right? Wine is riddled with bacteria. And when we fill a tank with grapes right out of the vineyard, if you put it under a microscope, the skin of a grape, there's fungus, mold, bacteria, all kinds of goodies, right? So lizard tails maybe end up in the tank.
Occasional squirrel.
Exactly. Try to avoid those if we can. They drink too much. But, the layers that go into a tank, and all of that becomes part of the wine, right? And so of course the stupid late night thinky Steve laying there going, well, does that make it better? Does the mold or the fungus, et cetera, is it better with it? Or have we just accepted that because that's just what's handed to us, right? And I joke, people have heard this before who've listened to me talk, I always say it's kind of like Henry Ford, right? If he could get into a Lamborghini right now, would he be happy about it or would he be sad, right? Because the purest version of that early car, right, Model T or one of the early cars, now there's surround sound and you can 0 to 60 in 1.8 seconds or something. So, would this technology help? So, I had to try it, because if you don't try something, you're really never going to understand. You can read articles all day long about things, particularly flavor, right? How does reading really equate to taste, right? So until you taste it. So I went down that rabbit hole. And what ozone does, it kills all the mold, fungus, bacteria. So essentially, you're putting a sterilized grape into the tank. So now there is no bacteria, mold, fungus living in the wine. So do you need sulfur, sulfites? Exactly. Because there are little soldiers floating in a bottle of wine that are helping keep it fresh for us. Wine wants to become vinegar. That's its life mission. Our life mission is to try to suspend it at wine long enough to finish the bottle, right?
Exactly. Yes.
We've all opened a bottle, and 3 or 4 days later, not the same thing, right?
No. Let's use it for the salad.
Exactly. Yeah, a little acetobacter gets growing in there. So I had to try it. So in the end, and sulfur is a flavor muter. Sulfur has side effects. And some people blame it for hangovers. Maybe some people do have a little sensitivity to sulfur, and it might have something to do with it, but I don't believe it's the main factor. We could go into that in another interview. But anyway, so just by making a wine with no sulfites made the wine fresher, but there was a layer of it. And I know we're supposed to talk about micro-oxygen here. We're talking all about ozone. But
No.
Okay.
Ozone's what I think it's fascinating. And I'll tell you why I think it's so fascinating. Years ago, I have a background like you in science. I have a doctorate in a related field, extensive background in chemistry. But I was a perfumer. When I first got out of school, I worked as a perfumer. And, the typical person can recognize 400 to 500 scents. A winemaker can probably recognize 1,000. A perfumer, normally we can recognize 2,500 to 3,000 scents because we're trained. We seal the labels and things like that. So even though I don't have a great sense of smell, I have a very well-trained sense of smell. I was here with clients one day, and they opened up the bottle that had been done with the ozone, and from 8 feet away, I could tell the difference. That I could smell that wine, and that sulfur tang was gone. And you don't realize it's there until it's not there.
Yeah, totally.
It was like...
that makes me so happy to hear that.
It was a revelation to me. I was so excited about this. I've told so many people about it over the years.
Yeah, and that is exactly what makes it so wonderful, because in the end, people don't realize these sulfur in there is muting flavor, aroma, etc. So I equate it to going to the farmer's market and having, let's just say, a carrot, right? You go into the grocery store, you have the ones laying out there, then you have the organic ones, right? Yes. But then you go to the farmer's market, and it's a whole different level. Yeah. The flavor's better. There's just a different thing about it, right? Yeah. And so that's the way these wines were. And so now you're kind of going, okay, well, do they last? Okay, so the studies, even to today, show that the wines without the sulfites done with ozone actually last longer than the wines with. So again, you've got some soldiers in there, but how much bacteria, how much mold, and we have maximum levels, legal levels that we can add, obviously, of chemicals to a wine. And here at Reynolds, and I think a majority of the smaller wineries, we had very low levels.
Right.
A lot of times people talk about Europe and they say, well, they don't add sulfites. Well,
Yeah.
we'll leave that alone. I want to burst the bubble of Europe, but we'll just say, I think you need to look into that a little bit more. But we do add some. Ours are very low level, and there's a maximum legal level. So let me just kind of put it this way. If you have a board of directors to answer to, and you're making 500,000 cases plus, something tells me you're not going to recall that wine.
No.
So you're probably going to go about 0.00001% less than the legal limit of sulfites. But
Or go the other way around, because they're buying grapes that maybe are a little dirty.
right.
If the grapes come in and that it's been a little marginal today, you add a little bit more to overcome the problem. Where if you're a small winery, you see every single basket coming in.
Exactly. And we attention to detail. It's kind of like, I always, and again, I use this a lot. So if anyone hears this, there's grandma's 1 apple pie, 2 apple pies sitting in the windowsill, or there's, the production line of 10,000 pies.
Big
so
difference.
There's a difference. And I think that's what the most wonderful part about being a small producer is people are starting to pay attention to that. Right. And so, I think it's magnificent. I wish I'd had a bigger name in the ozone thing. I did lecture to the Technical Winemakers Guild and had a bunch of winemakers come. And I think we did get it up to, I want to say there's probably 30 or 40 winemakers in California that were trying it. But the thing I do want to step back on that is you don't have to use it just to make a sulfite-free wine. There are so many other reasons to use it or uses, and it all has to do with dosing. So to get a wine that is stable without sulfites is a very high dose, right? So for those of you who are sitting there listening to this and trying to wonder what the hell this is, right? So there's a machine that actually produces this basically colorless, you can't see it, gas, and it's piped into a airtight container, usually a refrigeration truck that's sealed, and it's basically piped in there. And the way to do it is, if you can, is to have the baskets with the grapes have slits in the side so it can penetrate through.
Circulate.
And so it's super high dosing. In fact, you die pretty quickly if you walked in there.
Exactly.
And so it's have to be done very safely. But now imagine also a different use for it. So that high dosing is to kill all the mold, fungus, and bacteria, and actually penetrates all the way through the cell wall.
Wow.
And so I'm going to skip around like a squirrel here. The other reason that it's so wonderful before I go on to the other uses is what happened with the grape discovery and making wines sulfite-free was the fact that it does penetrate the cell wall is the grape goes through a little fight or flight reaction itself. So it realizes, because let's face it, it's just gotten picked. It's sitting there on the stem. It thinks it's blowing in the breeze. It doesn't realize it's been picked. So it goes into the refrigeration box, starts to get dosed, and all of a sudden, this gas starts to hit the cell wall level. Well, the grape goes into fight or flight as well. So it starts to produce extra antioxidants.
And
that's its protective mechanism.
Right, exactly.
And actually flavor. So whatever little bit of use the grape on the stem has, it's able to actually up the flavor profiles ever so slightly.
Right.
Exactly. And you end up getting almost double the antioxidants of a regular wine. So that benefit was obviously beautiful. But now I'll step back to other uses. If it rained, we usually have to add chemicals. If we get mold, and it can happen in less than 20 hours, we can lose an entire vineyard.
Easily.
So now we have to use chemicals in the tank to usually copper sulfate or these various things to kind of correct and get rid of the mold, or it ruins the wine.
Right.
Well, there's a dose for that. You can just go kill the mold or fungus, not much lower dose, without adding any chemicals. And it's 100% organic. So
that's wonderful.
Anyway, I know
there's no residuals at all.
Exactly.
That's the whole thing. And, the sulfur, it's interesting that you mentioned about that the wines actually age better, and it makes perfect sense. It's like reverse osmosis water. That you can, if you have reverse osmosis water, you put it into a glass bottle and you put it on the shelf and you test that water 5 years later, it's still perfectly drinkable.
Yep.
Because it simply is that pure. It makes perfect sense that once you remove all these other things that are working against the basic chemistry of the plant,
Yeah.
It's fine because fruit, when you go into it, I'm an herbalist. I studied herbology and physiology for many years. And one of the things that we know is that every plant has some toxicity because it doesn't want to be eaten. The plants don't really want to be eaten.
Yeah.
The fact that we do it, that's nice, but they have their defensive mechanisms. But fruit are the one places where they don't have it.
Yeah,
because they want the animals and the people to take them. And
that's the way it propagates,
the seed. And so it's really a very safe kind of nutrient for us. And if you remove all of its attackers, of course it's going to last.
Exactly. That's great.
It's a complete system. But I'm really, I know for a while, did you stop doing it for a little while there?
We have stopped doing it. We did a few years ago, stop doing it. I mean, we made it. It was great. The process is, I'll be honest, a little more expensive.
I would think so.
The fact that it didn't catch on so well, Pura Vino pulled back out. So, we're not doing it now. We do have a few bottles. In fact, our wine was called The Quote. And I thought it was kind of fun because if you know our winery, I'm really into labels and packaging, and I'll call it the experience, right?
Nice.
And, I wanted to, of course, taste good. That's what we work the hardest on. But I think there's a whole ritual to it, from everything from holding the bottle, seeing the bottle, the cork, everything, the whole sensory perception of the whole thing involves all the senses. So the quote to me was, I always think it's kind of funny that when you open a bottle of wine and you get about halfway through, conversation usually changes. All great things happen over a bottle of wine. And I thought we get a little philosophical, don't we? Very much. So the back of every bottle had a quote, a unique quote. And so I put out to our wine club to send us in all these quotes. So it was great. It could be anything from the Doobie Brothers verse to Benjamin Franklin to something someone's grandfather had said.
Well, that's wonderful.
So I thought it was cool.
That's really wonderful. I think that one of the reasons I'm also interested in this is that a lot of what I've been talking about I do commentaries at the beginning of our things, and I've been commenting about, moving forward, wine was the original health drink, for many reasons. And I think it's especially pertinent with you because you come from the healing arts. This was forefront of your mind for many years, and it's almost impossible for you to make wine that you don't want to be healthy.
Exactly.
And I think this approach is actually a healthier approach to wine because sulfur is, it's an enzyme inhibitor.
Right.
So it's going to affect people in certain ways. So come back, and we're going to keep talking with Steve after the break here at Wine Country at Work. So we're back here at Wine Country at Work. So Steve, tell me about your tequila brand. This is really quite a remarkable story.
Yeah, so years ago when I first was getting on the road, or I guess you might say my first wine dinner, and having been a dentist where you spoke with Mrs. Smith one-on-one, and pretty easy to talk, right? I get along with everybody, but public speaking, maybe not. So I just remember vividly being here and kind of having that conversation with my guys here in the cellar, and pretty much almost all of our team is from Mexico. Not everyone, but majority, certainly the vineyards and the cellar. And I've learned more from them than anyone, any Davis degree or whatever wherever. I mean, hands, boots on the ground is really the most important. And, I remember saying to them, hey, I think I'm going to be a little nervous to speak. I have my first dinner, and I might have been 32 people or something at a country club. Yeah. So it was a decent sized group. And so one of my guys said, hey, Steve, Mr. Reynolds, drink some tequila, so I'm like, oh, okay. So, I didn't think much about it. Yeah. But so I go and I'm like, okay, I got there early. Of course, you're early putting out your brochures and everything, and went to the bar and I had a little tequila shot. I thought, okay, a little liquid courage. Here we go. And then I don't know why something happened. It kind of ended up changing my life, candidly. I told the bartender, hey, can you chill down and bring in 32? I mean, I'm telling you, this is 26 years ago, way before Clooney or any of the celebrity. It was not a thing. But I did drink it, and a couple other wine guys, the Benziger family, Chris Benziger, and a bunch of the bad Benziger boys. Yeah, and Chris is a really good old friend of mine. So we used to actually travel.
So we have friends in common.
Yeah, we drink, and we call them actually defibrillators, where you do a shot of tequila and have a little espresso back. This is a Mexican coffee, but it sounded good, right? So anyway, he brings, I say, bring in 32 shots of tequila. So I'm in there, and they ding the glass to get up and speak. And right as I do that, the door kind of burst open because I think he kicked it open, which the whole room turned around. And it was a moment, right?
Yes.
He has a tray of all these shot glasses. And so here are these people in suit and tie and stuff looking around like, what the hell is this? So I say, hey, I brought you something from south of the border. It's not made from a grape, and this is just something I'd like to share with you. So what I ended up doing is saying, hey, the true winemakers of California are not here today. I'm here. They're back working their butts off and never get any thanks, and this is what they drink. And I just, behind all of us, there are people that are allowing us to be here tonight, and here's to them. So it became a very heartfelt toast, and it kind of went viral. So instantly, one little action created a whole life path for me. So now I end up going down the road for several years, maybe 10. Some people were nice enough to provide the tequila. Other people handed me a bill at these dinners. So I'm like, okay, I think I'm losing money. I'm buying all these tequila shots for everybody because some of the dinners got quite big. And then I started to wonder if they were showing up to drink the wine or they were just coming for the surprise tequila shot and they'd told their friends, right? So I finally decided, hey, I need to learn about this. So I read a great book, How Gringos Stole Tequila. It's a fantastic book. I know, how can you read a book 700 and some odd pages about tequila, but it's fantastic. The whole history of tequila and, the Spaniards invading Mexico, blah, blah, blah. But I won't go into that. But so I go down there and decide to do almost a 2-year, hundreds of trips back and forth of learning all things agave. And I did not want to make a tequila because I'd made a ton of wines. We've made a ton of wines for celebrities and people here. And, and I call myself the Milli Vanilli of the wine industry, made a bunch of little things for people. And I thought, I'm going to find somebody that can help me. So I tasted bulk, went to, 20, 30 different distillers, blah, blah, blah. And finally I realized that Mexico has 32 states. 5 of them can produce tequila. And I thought, okay, has anyone made a tequila from all of these 5 regions? And no. So I decided, because as I traveled to all of them, they were all a little different. Same plant. One agave plant, Blue Weber agave, can make tequila, and there's about 120 different varietals. But anyway, I decided, hey, the soil's a little different. This is different. It's a lot like the 5 noble grapes from France. This art of blending and layering characters for, 5 came back. So I decided to lease fields. Now, by this time, I have some partners, some great partners, friends of mine that jumped in. We all jumped in the minivan together kind of a thing. And so Penta's 5 partners, all of them are Napa boys. All of them were involved in the wine industry. So here we are, 5 wine dudes going down there. And ended up growing agave in all 5 regions and making the first tequila with layers of flavors that represent all of Mexico.
The Corazon de Mexico.
Exactly. So in the end, I had to go deeper, right? I watched what they were doing. Their fermentation process was terrible. They didn't care. There was one industrial yeast everybody used.
Really?
Now, some people do use a little indigenous natural yeast, mostly from fruit trees like Herradura. But I decided to go a little deeper. So I actually was the first guy to work with a champagne yeast specialist from France. So the first one to ferment on champagne yeast, the first one to start controlling temperatures of the fermentations.
Which you would think would be so critical, so essential.
Well, down there, what I noticed, first of all, they're super proud of what they do as well. They should be. So there was a pride and there was a learning curve and there was a hazing process with another gringo coming down to tell them something. And it really was, mine was purely to honor, and it was really coming from a good place. Yeah. And I just wanted to learn.
So you couldn't help yourself.
Oh, God, no. You can tell by now, right?
You're a scientist. You can't help yourself.
So anyway, ended up, think about it, Mexican water, right? Okay. When you distill, what it is you take an agave plant that is not sweet. People think it's a cactus, but it's not. It's closer to let's just say the palm or the lily than it is even a cactus. So you cut the spiky leaves off and you work with just the piña, which is the main part of the plant, and you cut it in half and you roast it. So basically you're taking something like jicama or potato, and there's no sweetness, but by adding heat, you hydrolyze a starch to become a sugar. And now you have something sweet. So then you grind it, mash it, whatever your process is, and I know that's part of this, you mix it with water. So it's 99% water. So, it's like Coors Light. Does the water matter? Of course, or Coors, I should say. So better water, Now, champagne yeast, controlling temperatures, using nutrients.
So we're adding nutrients to make sure the fermentation moved in the
Exactly,
proper
because
process.
you know how it is.
You just get
Basically, you're
hungry.
making a better wine.
Yes.
You're literally fermenting a low alcohol wine that goes into the still. Now, the still is important. Of course it is. But I kept arguing with them. But what you put in the still matters about what comes out the other side, right? So we worked very hard on the product that went into the still. And I always say it wasn't one magical thing, but it was several that layered up. Like one piece of paper on the table is super thin, but you stack a bunch on there and now you got something, right? So we went down this process and then I found out they don't use new oak, or they don't have any, like Allier versus Nevers, French oak versus American, different forests, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, different toasts, different thicknesses. They just use used whiskey bourbon barrels because that was the cheapest thing they could buy. Yes. And again, it was all about $5 in a worm. It was not the idea of a $200 bottle, now thousands of dollars, and refinement. So I went down. So Penta became this whole life experience for me, and now is 14 years ago. So we have beautiful product now, and we ended up winning some amazing awards.
And you took the top in the world, and
so so believe it or not, the Paris tasting, which of course is famous because of Chateau Montelena and Stag's Leap Wine Cellars putting Napa back on the map, beating all the other French wines in the Paris tasting. Well, they actually have a spirits division every year too. So now there's a wine and a spirits. So I don't know what it was, 4 or 5 years ago, first year that we came out with our tequila. We have now 4 of them, but our company we were working with, or the distiller that we were working with down there, said, "Hey, we're going to enter some tequilas in some of these world things. You want to put it in?" We said, "Sure." Well, we ended up winning the #1 spirit in the new spirit category that year. And then to add on to that, they had a party in Paris afterwards, and they took the top 10 spirits that had won the categories, and then they had a mixology party. And our mixologist won the #1 cocktail of the night too. So it was like, woohoo. So this little garage band, silly, stupid thing that the 5 of us were doing just to give out as gifts for Christmas overnight became something.
That's wonderful. It makes, as I mentioned, I was a perfumer. It's the same thing like in perfumery. The small things you do at different stages make all the difference later on. And you're right, what goes into the still, it's going to change the results. And, it's interesting because of their traditions, they didn't think to use these things, and they were working with a certain economic. But you realize, being in Napa, of course, that there's another level of economic here you can aim at, because there's a lot of people here who do like tequila, and we have a lot of visitors who like tequila.
Yeah.
A lot of people get introduced to tequila here, which is interesting, but it's a place where people
It's a
come.
thing. And now, there are several other winemakers that are making tequila. Very famous one coming out with one right now. And I love, and a few of them have said, that I'm the first. I'm not going to name names, but hey, that's not true. Just letting you know. I know there was one other guy before me that went down the rabbit hole a little bit, but it was such a cool thing in that book by Chantel, how Ringo stole tequila. Great read. In fact, it ended up leading to a movie